Hello ladies and gentlemen, gabestah here. This is the full guide for heroic twin consorts. And as usual, if you just need the basics for a quick guide, click on the annotation on screen. So, let's get started. So for raid composition, you'll want 2 tanks and 2 or 3 healers. I recommend 2 healers by far. The healing requirement is very easy on this encounter. And in fact, I spend most of the early parts of the fight just eminence healing. So Disc Priest or Mistweaver Monk can be really good for this encounter. So the new addition on Heroic, the first one, is Lurkers of the Night, which is a new add type you'll see during the Dusk phase against Lulin. So if you look in melee range, there's one Lurker attacking a tank right now. But for the most part, if you look kind of on the right of the screen, the top and stuff, you can see little bolts of shadow coming in at the raid very quickly. These are the Lurkers shooting random raid members. And as the phase progresses, these will spawn very frequently. So if you did nothing to deal with the Lurkers, the amount of spike damage on random raid members would get quite high. It's very similar to the heroic Garajal encounter in Mogushan Vaults, in that you have these adds that are in another realm of sorts that cannot be directly attacked until you deal with them from that realm in some way. So the best thing to keep in mind is that as the phase progresses, the damage will increase if you don't deal with these in the proper way. The good news is dealing with these adds is pretty simple. All you need to do is have your tank move Suen. If you look at the top left there of the screen, you saw it briefly. While she's doing her Tears of the Sun spinning attack, move within 10 or 15 yards or so of the Lurker of the Night spawn locations. So once she's within 10 or 15 yards of them, she will cause them to basically appear and they'll become attackable. So your tank that is moving Suen around to aggro those and bring them out of the realm can then just pick them up and pull them into melee range after Tears of the Sun has completed. So that's it. It's a pretty easy mechanic to deal with, to be quite honest. You just have to basically deal with the damage that can come out when the numbers get pretty high if you're not able to clean them all up. And otherwise, just have your tank. There he's running around the bottom and the left side, getting more Lurker spawns. Have your tank pick up as many as possible every time Tears of the Sun goes off. So the other addition on Heroic is Nuclear Inferno, which, as you might guess, occurs during Suen's phase, the daytime. This causes Suen to stand still and spin around for 8 seconds while she channels Nuclear Inferno. And during this period, she cannot be attacked. She will deflect all attacks and spells. But in addition, she'll do about 100,000 fire damage to everyone in the raid every second for the 8-second period. And this, of course, is modified by her Blazing Radiance stack that increases her fire damage dealt. So, in addition to the Blazing Radiance damage that's going out, just by nature of the phase, you also have these 100,000 ticks or more modified by Blazing Radiance stacks on your raid. So to mitigate this, you simply have to stack your raid in an existing ice comet so that you're all within the icy shadows, which on Heroic does a reduction of 60% of the fire damage. So it's not quite as much as the normal reduction, but it's still a significant amount and worth standing in. So here you can see as Nuke is about to be cast, everyone stacks up here and then just heal through it pretty much. Use cooldowns if you need it, but that's all there is to it for the most part. So for phase 1 against Lulin, the methods here on Heroic are pretty much similar to what you see on normal. You just have to be a little more careful. So we have our ranged players kind of spread out around the circle with the boss tanked in between them all. You can see the raid markers for the ranged players. So it's important everyone is spread out so that Cosmic Barrage does not hit multiple players, because otherwise you will probably be one-shot if you take 2 hits of Cosmic Barrage. Other than that, the healing on the phase 1 is pretty minor, so I'm pretty much fully Eminence DPSing and healing as one of the healers here. And then I'll briefly talk about the tank that's not on Lulin at the time needs to taunt Suen when she does her Tears of the Sun and run Suen near the Lurkers to get them out. Once the Lurkers are active, that tank should just get aggro and then run back to the main melee position where the Lurkers can be cleaved down in slow fashion. Once they're actually out, they're not going to use their Shadow Bolt attack anymore. They'll just attack the main tank that they have threat on. So they're much less dangerous. So pretty much your DPS can ignore Lurkers and just let the tank and miscellaneous cleave deal with them. Your raid should also try to be aware of their location relative to the Moon Lotus spawns, and particularly where the little mists are shooting out from, because on Heroic, the number of these mists that will be active at once is quite high, and having everyone get put to sleep will cause a severe loss in DPS, not to mention, especially if you're 2 healing, you may not be able to dispel very frequently. So just communicate with Vent or Mumble and let your melee stack or your ranged players know if they're about to get hit by one. That's pretty much all you need to do. Then the last thing to consider for phase 1 is the statues that you need to use. So just like in normal, you can use all the statues once throughout phases 1 and 2 combined, and then they will all reset and you can use them all again for the final phase 3. However, because phase 1 is pretty simplistic and there's not a lot of damage or anything that will really kill everybody, we found it was best to only use cranes on phase 1 against Lulin, and then all the other statues we save because we just want more DPS time. So the very first statue that we use, cranes, is used right away, and we actually have our second tank, who's our monk. He's not picking up any of the initial spawns. So as soon as the fight starts, he clicks on the crane statue and goes down and spawns it, so that he can come out around the time that the crane statue's spawning and be ready for Suen's first Tears of the Sun to activate. And then he can pick her up and run her around as necessary. The final thing worth mentioning on the Dusk phase is Beast of Nightmares. And just like in Heroic, once the beast is spawned on your tank, any heals applied to that tank will generally cause a stack of the corruption. And on Heroic, this dot does a lot of damage. So you have to be very careful that you don't get stacks of this if you are a healer. The best thing you can do is simply test out your heals, use an attempt or two, and just completely figure out which heals for your healers will apply this and which will not. So for example, I've learned over Heroic pretty much which monk heals are going to cause stacks and which are not. So for example, the initial application of Renewing Mist will cause a stack, but the hot ticks of it will not. Any direct heals will cause a stack, but something like Eminence Healing, that's sort of indirect, and Smart Heal will not cause a stack. Likewise, our shaman found that casting Healing Rains, regardless of whether it's active already or not, the first tick that activates while the corrupted, or while the Beast of Nightmares is active will cause a stack, but only once. So there's some unique ways that these spells are coded and how it works with that ability, and you should just test it out with whatever heal spec you have available and see which heals you can safely cast on the tank and which you cannot. Anyway, once you figure that out, then best thing to do really is just to allow your tank to do the majority of their self-healing along with any of these smart heals that don't cause stacks. So between the Paladin's self-healing and Eminence Healing, we really don't have to directly heal the tank at all. And this makes things a lot easier for our other tank who's dealing with suen and all that stuff. So for phase 2, the day phase, as soon as it starts, as you can see, all the lurkers that were active leading up to this phase are instantly revealed, and they'll come in and aggro the raid. Once again, just have your tank pick them up, and don't worry about it for DPS reasons. They don't do any damage at all, so you can just let your tanks and cleave damage finish them off. So, just like normal, suen will gain Blazing Radiance stacks, and thus the damage can get a little bit high if you do not manage these stacks properly. However, there's one somewhat possible quirk at the start of the phase that can make things a little bit more difficult depending on your luck. The basic issue here is that sometimes, and I should say most of the time, suen will spawn 2 ice comets during this phase, or rather, Lulin spawns the ice comets, but she will spawn 2 of them before the first Nuclear Inferno by suen. So when you get 2 of them, you can freely use the first ice comet with your tanks to reduce the Blazing Radiance stacks, just like you normally would do, and then your raid can save the second one and stack inside that second comet for Nuclear Inferno. However, if you are unlucky, maybe 1 out of every 5 tries or so, you will only get 1 ice comet before that first Nuclear Inferno. And if that's the case and you use it all up with the Blazing Radiance, so there isn't any comet to stand in for nuke, then you're going to have to use tons of cooldowns for your raid to survive the nuke damage since you cannot reduce it. It is completely survivable, however, even with 2 healers, but you're pretty much going to have to blow through all your survival cooldowns to do it, and it's not a good position to be in. So, to help alleviate this, it seems that you can use the tiger statue at the start of phase 2, around the time that the first comet is spawning, essentially, so that it will reduce the number of Blazing Radiance stacks that are applied, as well as lower the damage that Blazing Radiance does. And that way, if you happen to still not get the second comet, you can generally, heal through the damage, because both Nuclear Inferno and Blazing Radiance will not tick quite as quickly, and so the damage is much lower. So, essentially, try to plan on using your Tiger buff so that it's going to be active around the time that the second comet would spawn, or the time of the first Nuclear Inferno. And that will help you a great deal in surviving that. So beyond that initial Nuclear Inferno, the pattern is pretty simple, and it doesn't take very long to get used to it. So essentially, once a Nuclear Inferno has gone off and your raid is stacked inside an ice comet, then from that point forward, every 3rd ice comet should be saved and used for the next upcoming Nuclear Inferno. So your tanks should just be aware that basically they can soak up 2 ice comets in a row, and then the 3rd one, the one following that, will need to be saved. And saving this simply requires keeping suen about 20 or more yards away from the comet so that it's not actually losing health at a rapid rate. So, for example, here you can see that we're saving this comet because this was our second one of before the first nuke, so we weren't sure if we were going to get one. Anyway, so we're using that one up, and then we use the second one up. And now we'll use this final one. And remember, because we're 1 ahead, so technically this one that just spawned is the second one for our tanks, so they can use that one freely, because we will get another one, the 3rd of the round, which just came out there, just before our Nuclear Inferno's cast. So there's the Inferno ink bar, just a warning for myself. And so everyone is being told to stack up in here, and the tanks keep suen away until she starts to cast Nuclear Inferno, so that the ice comet will survive. And once the Inferno is done, we spread out. Tanks use the comet, get rid of blazing stacks just like normal. There's the next comet, so she's soaking the first one now, and then she'll be moved over to the second one. And then in a moment, we should see the third ice comet, which we will again save for the upcoming nuke. So this pattern just keeps repeating over and over. Like I said, it's beyond that first one where you may or may not get 2 before the first nuke. It's a very simple, repeatable pattern every time. Other than that, it's very similar to normal. So just, again, have your raids stay spread out so you don't all take damage from the various nukes or the charge that she does. And stack up when you need to for the nuke, and then you should be fine. So finally, for Phase 3, against both the twins, in addition to the normal tidal force attack from Lulin, you also still have to deal with Nuclear Inferno from Suen. However, you'll no longer get the Lurkers of the Night spawns, and of course you don't get Beast of the Nightmare either. So you can freely heal the tank and all that stuff, and you don't have to move the boss around in any weird way. So just like in normal, your goal here is to kill Suen first before you kill Lulin, because otherwise you would not be able to get rid of the blazing stacks, nor would you be able to stack an ice comets. So the best thing to focus on really is using your statue cooldowns as appropriate for the tidal force. So we have our Balance Druid make sure that we use Tiger just as the first tidal force was happening. So you may have seen a moment ago, she was slowed a great deal, and thus the damage is very minor for that attack. Other than that, then you'll have to deal with Nuclear Inferno. So the same basic pattern applies that did in the second phase. You can use 2 comets, and then you save the third, and have your raid stack in the comet for nuke, and then spread out once it's over. And that's pretty much it. So these attacks are both pretty easy to deal with. You just have to be prepared for which one's coming up. So use your boss timers and keep in mind what's going to happen. We also use cranes, as you can see here, after the Nuclear Inferno goes off, the first one, so that it's going to hit both the bosses, because otherwise one of the bosses will probably be dead by then. However, this means that the second tidal force, we don't have any big cooldowns going for it. So just use your personal cooldowns and then any major raid cooldowns that you might have, since you won't have a statue going. If you absolutely have trouble surviving that second tidal force by using cranes there, then you can just replace it with Ox instead to offer you a little more survivability. But that's pretty much it. If you use cranes on Lulin in the first phase, as I mentioned, then she'll be quite low health when you get into this phase, which is fine. Suen will be higher. But you'll be saving Bloodlust until this final phase while you're on both of them. So this is a good time that you can burn Suen down quite readily and really just push her to die as quickly as possible. If you have even moderate DPS, especially if you're 2 healing, you should easily be able to get Suen dead and probably Lulin as well before the third tidal force. But again, if not, you should be able to use either Ox or your raid cooldowns to survive that third tidal force. And Infernos, Nuclear Infernos don't need any raid cooldowns at all as long as you have an Ice Comet to stack in. So it's pretty simple to survive those. And that's really all there is to it. I have to admit, this fight is way, way easier than I thought it would be. I don't know what to compare it to, but I mean, you could do this fight as probably your 3rd or 4th encounter in this zone without much trouble. It's pretty simple these days, especially with the eye level boosts and whatnot. The DPS requirement is just not very severe, and there isn't a lot of healing to be done. If players are spread out properly, and just manage the very basics of the encounter. Once you get used to that Nuclear Inferno stacking and the timing, it's really simple. So yeah, that is Heroic Twin Consorts. As always, good luck. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed, please subscribe.